Hi and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be drafting a 6 pieces blouse. So if it's your first time viewing my channel, please hit on the subscribe button. So I've marked out my vertical measurement, which is my shoulder to bust, my shoulder to under bust, and I'm making use of my half length. So to get your half length is your under bust plus 3. So the reason why I'm making use of my half length is that my 6 pieces blouse to flow very well. If not, you can go ahead and use your shoulder to waist, then the total length of my blouse. The next thing I'm going to mark is my shoulder divided by 2. My shoulder is 14 divided by 2. I have 7 inches. So if you're attaching sleeve to this dress, you're just going to add half inch for your sleeve, making it 7.5, and I'm going to go down by 1 inch, and at that 1 inch I'm going to go ahead and create a shoulder slant for my pattern. So next I'm going to place my tape and get my chest line. So to get your chest line is your bust divided by 6 plus 1.5 inches, and after that I'm going to go ahead to mark. After marking that, next is to extend that line down to my chest line, and at my chest line I'm going to divide what I have into 2 to draw my armhole. So from that point I divided it into 2, I'm going to go in by half and I'll go ahead to draw my armhole. But before I do that, I'm going to measure my bust circumference divided by 4, and I will mark and draw my armhole. Next we're going to mark our dart intake, and to do that you're going to mark your nipple to nipple divided by 2, and I'm going to mark it at my under bust, my half length, and down to my top length. So next I'm going to place my tape and I'm going to go ahead to connect the lines that I have marked. So going over to my bust line, I'm still going to mark my nipple to nipple, but right now I'm going to be adding half inch to it, making it 4 inches. The reason why I'm doing this is that I don't want that part to be straight. Then I'll go ahead and connect it down to my under bust. So after doing that, I'll just go ahead to take my marker to outline the marks that I have made. So next, from that point we divided my armhole into 2. I'm going to connect it down to the bust line. So I'll go ahead to place my French curve and I'm going to draw it out. So after drawing it out, this is what I have. Right now all my darts is going to be on the armhole side. So in my previous videos, I have videos where I drafted a princess dart bustier. You can also check that out. There are different ways of doing that. So I'm going to mark my dart intake of 2 inches. So if you're on the big side, you can go ahead and mark 2.5 inches. So I'm going to do that at the top length, at the half length, and at the under bust. So next I'm going to connect and draw a straight line. So the next thing I'm going to do is to measure my shoulder to bust plus 1 inch, or you can just come down by 1 inch at your bust, and I will make a mark at that point. So I'll be connecting from my under bust down to that 1 inch mark I made at the bust line. So the reason why I did that 1 inch mark is to avoid having a pointy edge at that part. So this is what I have, and next from that mark I made at the armhole, I'm going to be coming down by 1 inch. So if you don't want to do this, you can go ahead and mark half inch on top and half inch below, and then you're going to connect it. So to make this pattern more simple, I'm just going to come down by 1 inch at this point. So if you're on the plus size or you're on the bigger size, you're going to mark 1.5 inches. After doing that, you'll be placing your French curve and you're going to connect it from that 1 inch down to your bust line. So from that line that I came down by 1 inch from, I'm going to be extending it by 1 inch. I'm going to replace that same 1 inch. So the reason why I'm doing this is because most times after joining your princess dart, you find out that one part is shorter, especially the armhole side. So if you do it this way, you're not going to have any shortage. Next, I'm going to place my tape and mark my bust circumference divided by 4. So remember that 1 inch mark we took from here, we're going to still replace it here, or if you took 1.5, you will replace it also. And then I'll go ahead and mark my sewing allowance, and then I'll extend whatever I have to the chest line, At the under bust, I'm going to measure my under bust circumference divided by 4. Measure the dart intake I have there, replace it, and mark my sewing allowance. So at the half length, I'm going to mark my waist circumference divided by 4. Measure the dart intake, I'll replace it, and mark my sewing allowance. At the blouse length, I'm going to mark my hip circumference divided by 4. Measure the dart intake, and I'll go ahead to replace it, and I'll mark my sewing allowance. So after doing that, what I'm going to do is to go ahead to connect my pattern from the chest line to the bust and down to the under bust, half length and blouse length. So next I'm going to place my French curve and I'll connect to my chest line. So after doing this, next we're going to create the 6 pieces effect on this pattern. So what I'm going to do right now on this pattern is that at my blouse length, I'm going to be going out by 2 inches. Now this depends on how full you want your 6 pieces to be. So I want mine to be on a moderate size, so you can use 2 to 6 inches, preferably 2.5 inches to 6 inches, but I want mine to be smaller. That's why I'm using 2 inches. So I'll just go ahead and connect it to my half length. So after connecting to my half length, at the other side I'm going to place and still mark my 2 inches. So now if you're using more than 2 inches, you're going to go ahead and cut out this whole pattern, and then you're going to attach paper by the sides and do that. So I'll be showing you that in the next part, which is the front part, when I'm cutting it. So I'll go ahead and I'll just label my pattern before we continue. So to give this a little curve, because you don't want a pointy edge, I'm going to go up by 1 inch at both sides. So after marking that 1 inch, what I'm going to do is to take my French curve and I'm going to connect it from that 1 inch I marked, and I'll make a curve, and I'll be doing this for both sides of my pattern. Step, I will be cutting this out. So remember, like I said, if you're using more than 3 inches, what you're going to do, you're going to cut out your pattern first, and you're going to attach paper by the side, and you're going to then create your 6 pieces effect. So that's what we'll be doing for the front part. I'm done cutting out, and this is what I have. Next we'll be moving to the center part. So just like I said, for those that are using more like 3 inches, 2.5, so you're going to attach paper to the sides of your pattern starting from your half length. And what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and measure whatever you're using at that point. So I'll go ahead and measure my 2 inches. So at the center I want it to be fuller. I'll go ahead and measure 3 inches. So this is optional. You can use the same measurement at both sides. So after that, I'm going to connect, and I'm going to go ahead and mark 1 inch, 1 inch, and I'm going to place my French curve. Go ahead and create that curve, and I'm just going to cut out what I have. So please, at this point, if you haven't yet subscribed, please hit on the subscribe button. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and leave your comment at the comment section. So after cutting out, this is what I have, and if you place it, you notice that the other side meets the other side at the armhole area. So this is the front pattern, and we'll be moving over to the back pattern. Going over to my back pattern, I've gone ahead to mark all the necessary measurements just like I did at the front. So next, I'm going to mark my dart, and all my measurement is going to start from my zipper allowance. I'm going to mark my nipple to nipple divided by 2, and I'm going to mark the dots on my under bust chest line, and I'm just going to connect and draw a straight line. So I'll go ahead and extend that line down to my chest line also. So after marking that, I'm just going to go ahead and divide my armhole into 2. So from that line, I'm going to connect to the chest line, and I'm just going to blend in that part. So from the lower part, I'm just going to mark 2 inches for my dart intake, and going to my half length or your waistline, you're going to go ahead and mark ½ inch on both sides. So I'm going to connect it down to that point this way. Then I will be extending it back to my bust line at the back. So now all my measurements will start after the zipper allowance. So I'm going to mark my bust circumference divided by 4, and I'm going to add my sewing allowance, and I'll add half in case I have any shortage at that part. I'll go down to my under bust. I'll mark my under bust circumference, measure the dart intake, and I'm going to replace it, and then mark my sewing allowance. Going down to my half length or waistline, I'm going to mark my waist circumference divided by 4. Go ahead to measure the dart intake, replace it, and mark my sewing allowance. Then going over to the top length, I'm going to mark my hip circumference divided by 4, and I'm going to mark my sewing allowance. So the next step I'll take from here is whatever I have at my bust, I'll extend to my chest line, and then I'll connect to my under bust half length and down to my top length. So now the next thing is to get rid of the bulginess at the back of the dress. So at the half length, I'll just go in by ½ inch, and I'm going to place my ruler and I'm going to extend it upwards. I'll go ahead, place it and extend it towards the top length also. Next, I'll go ahead to label my pattern, and after that I'm going to cut it out. So after cutting out my pattern, this is what I have, and I've gone ahead to attach the extra papers or pattern paper by the side. So what I'm going to do is to go ahead and mark my 2 inches I'm using. So please, I'm just using 2 inches because I don't want mine to be much, but you can use from 2.5 inches depending on how moderate you want yours to be. So I'm just going to go ahead and repeat the same thing by the side, and I'm going to connect to my half length. Then I'm going to go ahead and measure 1 inch just like we did in the front, and I'm going to mark and then take my French curve and I will connect it, and I'll also go ahead to connect the other side. After connecting, I'm just going to cut out the pattern, and after cutting out my pattern, this is what I have. Moving over to the other side, I'm going to mark 2 inches, and remember at my front side I used 3 inches, and I'll go ahead and mark that at the zipper part and connect. So you can go ahead and use the same measurement all through. Let's say you're using 3 inches, you can use it all through. After connecting, I'll go ahead to mark 1 inch, and I'm going to connect it, drawing a curve. So after connecting, what I'll do is I'll go ahead to cut this out. So after cutting out, my pattern is ready. So at this point, if you haven't yet subscribed, please hit on the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and also leave your comment at the comment section. Thanks.